Welcome, dear dreamer, to Candle by the Sea. Tonight, we journey to the ancient shores of the Nile, where lanterns glow beside quiet waters, forgotten corridors sleep beneath stone temples, and a hidden Pharaoh guards a secret not of gold, but of peace. So settle in gently, allow your breathing to slow, and let the soft sounds of the ancient river carry you toward rest. If you enjoy these sleep stories, you are warmly invited to subscribe for more peaceful journeys. And now, beneath the stars of ancient Egypt, our story begins. The Pharaoh's Secret. Part 1. The Lanterns of the Nile. The Nile moved softly beneath the night sky, carrying the riverboat northward through bands of silver moonlight that drifted across the water like folded silk. At the front of the vessel, a lone traveler stood quietly beneath a linen canopy, listening to the gentle rhythm of the oars dipping into the river. Each stroke disappeared almost soundlessly into the dark water before rising again, trailing threads of shimmering light behind it. Warm wind wandered slowly across the deck, carrying the scent of lotus blossoms and distant cedar smoke from unseen temples along the shore. Above, the stars stretched endlessly over ancient Egypt. They appeared brighter here than anywhere else in the world. The traveler rested both hands against the smooth wooden railing and watched as the river widened ahead. Far in the distance, beyond clusters of palms and sleeping reed beds, hundreds of lanterns flickered beside the shoreline like golden stars scattered across the earth itself. The city of Waset waited there, known centuries later as Luxor. The ancient city had long been called the Heart of Kings. Its temples rose beside the Nile like mountains carved from moonlight and stone. Great rulers had once walked beneath its towering columns. Priests had studied the stars from its rooftops. Musicians had filled its courtyards with harp songs that drifted across the river after sunset. And somewhere beneath those vast halls, hidden behind sealed corridors and forgotten walls, rested the mystery the traveler had come so far to find. The Pharaoh's secret. Yet standing there now, beneath the quiet stars, the traveler felt no urgency to uncover it, only calm curiosity. The riverboat drifted onward at an unhurried pace, as though the Nile itself wished to delay arrival just a little longer. Along the deck, several lanterns glowed behind woven shades of amber linen. Their light painted soft patterns across baskets of figs and pomegranates stacked near the mast. A sleeping cat rested beside a coil of rope, undisturbed by the movement of the boat. Nearby, an elderly boatman hummed gently beneath his breath while steering through the slow current. Everything seemed wrapped in stillness. The traveler closed their eyes for a moment and listened. Water brushing against wood, palm leaves whispering along the riverbanks, a distant bell sounding somewhere across the dark shore. It was the kind of silence that did not feel empty. It felt welcoming, as though the night itself had opened quietly to receive all who entered it peacefully. The traveler had spent many months crossing deserts and villages beside the Nile. Along the journey, stories had been shared beside cooking fires and beneath shaded courtyards. Again and again, whispers had returned to the same forgotten legend. A pharaoh whose final chamber had never been found. A ruler whose name had faded deliberately from history. A king who had hidden something more valuable than gold. Most dismissed the tale as an old river myth. Others spoke of curses or lost treasure buried beneath the temples of Waset. But once, many nights earlier, in a small riverside village south of the city, the traveler had met an old storyteller wrapped in pale blue linen robes. The old man had smiled gently while pouring mint leaves into steaming water. "There are some secrets," he had said softly, "that are hidden not because they are dangerous, but because they are delicate." Then he had pointed northward toward Waset, and now, at last, the city shimmered ahead beneath the moon. The riverboat gradually slowed as it approached the harbor. Stone docks stretched along the shoreline beneath rows of lantern poles swaying lightly in the breeze. Their reflections danced across the black water in long golden ribbons. Other boats rested nearby, fishing vessels, merchant barges, and elegant ceremonial boats with painted sails folded neatly against their masts. Soft voices drifted through the harbor. Footsteps crossed wooden piers. Somewhere nearby, someone played a reed flute so gently that the melody seemed woven into the wind itself. The traveler stepped carefully onto the dock as the boatman lowered a narrow wooden bridge between vessel and shore. "Welcome to Waset," the old boatman said with a warm smile. The traveler thanked him quietly before drawing a light cloak closer against the cool night air. The city unfolded slowly ahead. Wide stone pathways curved between towering columns, carved with lotus flowers and painted falcons. Pools of water reflected moonlight from hidden courtyards. Palm trees swayed above white limestone walls, washed silver beneath the stars. Nothing felt hurried. Even the city's movement seemed softened by the late hour. Servants carried lanterns through garden corridors. Temple attendants moved silently between archways with bowls of incense. Musicians sat beside fountains plucking strings that shimmered gently through the night air. The traveler walked slowly, allowing the atmosphere of the city to settle around them like warm water. For a long while, there was no destination at all. Only wandering, only breathing. The path eventually opened into a broad courtyard lined with enormous statues, whose calm stone faces gazed toward the Nile. Between them burned tall bronze lanterns scented faintly with myrrh. The traveler paused there. Ahead rose the outer walls of one of Waset's great temple palaces, its entrance framed by banners that stirred softly in the wind. Hieroglyphs climbed the walls in flowing rows, illuminated by torchlight. And there, seated quietly beside a reflecting pool, beneath a flowering sycamore tree, sat an elderly man surrounded by scroll cases. He wore long ivory robes edged with faded gold thread. Thin silver bracelets rested loosely against his wrists. Several small oil lamps glowed beside him, illuminating weathered hands and kind, thoughtful eyes. The traveler approached slowly. The old man looked up, as though he had already been expecting company. "You arrived by river," he said gently. It was not a question. The traveler nodded. "The Nile carries people where they are meant to go," the old man continued, "especially at night." His voice was calm and unhurried, blending almost seamlessly with the sound of water rippling within the pool beside him. The traveler lowered their gaze respectfully. "I was told," they said softly, "that there are records here, old records, concerning a forgotten pharaoh." At this, the old man smiled very slightly. "Many arrive in Waset, searching for forgotten kings. And do they find them?" "Sometimes," he said, "but rarely in the way they expected." A warm breeze drifted through the courtyard, stirring the branches overhead. White blossoms loosened from the sycamore tree and spiraled slowly down onto the surface of the reflecting pool. The old man gestured toward the stone bench beside him. "Please," he said, "sit. The night is long, and stories should never begin in haste." The traveler sat. For a while, neither spoke. Together, they listened to the city breathing softly beyond the temple walls. The old man poured cool water from a painted clay vessel into 2 shallow cups. The water carried hints of mint and citrus leaves. He offered 1 cup to the traveler before gazing thoughtfully toward the stars above the courtyard. "My name," he said at last, "is Menetka. I keep the temple archives." The traveler recognized immediately what that meant. The archives beneath Waset were famous throughout the Nile kingdoms. Endless chambers filled with records of dynasties, celestial maps, forgotten ceremonies, and histories so old that even priests spoke of them with reverence. If anyone knew of the hidden pharaoh, it would be this man. Yet Menetka seemed entirely uninterested in impressing that fact upon anyone. He simply sat beside the water, calm as moonlight. "You have traveled far," he observed. "Yes. And what is it you hope to find here?" The traveler considered the question carefully. At last, they answered truthfully, "I do not know." Menetka smiled again. "That is often the best reason to begin." Somewhere deeper within the temple complex, a bell sounded softly 3 times. The old archivist rose slowly to his feet. "The guest chambers are prepared for travelers," he said. "You may rest there tonight. Tomorrow, if the morning remains kind, I will show you something." The traveler stood and followed him through a series of open-air corridors, lit by low bronze lamps. As they walked, the temple revealed itself gradually. Massive painted columns disappeared upward into shadow like tree trunks within an ancient forest. Murals lined the walls in deep blues and faded golds. stars, river reeds, celestial boats drifting across painted heavens. The scent of incense lingered everywhere, not heavy, only soft, like memory itself. Their footsteps echoed gently against polished stone floors worn smooth by centuries of passing sandals. Occasionally, they passed silent attendants carrying folded linens or trays of figs and honey cakes. Beyond one archway, the traveler glimpsed an inner garden where white lotus flowers floated upon dark pools beneath hanging lanterns. Everything in Waset seemed designed not merely for beauty, but for stillness. At last, Menetka stopped before a narrow cedar door, carved with stars and crescent moons. "Here," he said softly. Inside waited a peaceful chamber cooled by stone walls and perfumed faintly with jasmine oil. Thin linen curtains drifted beside an open balcony overlooking the Nile far below. Several lanterns glowed warmly beside a low bed layered with woven blankets. The traveler stepped inside slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Menetka reached into the sleeve of his robe and withdrew a small object wrapped carefully in linen cloth. "A gift," he said. The traveler unfolded the cloth gently. Inside rested a small golden amulet shaped like an open lotus flower. Its surface was worn smooth with age. "This symbol," Menetka said quietly, "was once associated with a king whose name no longer appears in the royal lists." The traveler looked up. The forgotten Pharaoh, the archivist's eyes reflected softly in the lantern light. "Sleep now," he said. "Tomorrow, the corridors beneath the temple will open." Then, with the quiet grace of someone disappearing into a dream, Menetka stepped back into the corridor and closed the cedar door behind him. Silence settled once more. The traveler crossed slowly toward the balcony overlooking the Nile. Below, the river flowed endlessly through the moonlit dark, carrying reflections of stars upon its surface like scattered fragments of heaven. The city lanterns shimmered beside the water. Temple bells echoed faintly in the distance, and somewhere beneath the sleeping stone halls of Waset, hidden beyond sealed chambers and forgotten passages, the Pharaoh's secret waited patiently in the dark. But for tonight, there was only the river, only the stars, only the slow and peaceful breathing of the ancient world beneath the endless Egyptian sky. Part 2. The Hidden Corridors. Morning arrived softly over Waset, before the sun had fully risen above the eastern desert hills. Pale blue light drifted gently across the Nile, turning the surface of the river into rippling silver glass. Mist hovered low above the water reeds, while distant birds traced quiet circles through the awakening sky. Within the temple palace of Waset, silence still lingered through the corridors. The traveler awoke slowly beneath woven linen blankets, listening for a moment to the calm sounds drifting through the open balcony. Water against stone embankments, palm leaves brushing together in the breeze, and somewhere far below, the faint creaking of riverboats preparing for the day. The chamber remained cool from the night air. Amber lanterns had burned low beside the walls, leaving behind only a soft scent of cedar smoke and jasmine oil. Thin curtains moved gently near the balcony entrance, breathing inward and outward like slow tides. For several quiet moments, the traveler remained still, holding the small golden lotus amulet in their hand. Its worn surface seemed warmer now in the morning light. Not magical, not glowing, simply old. Old in the way river stones become smooth beneath centuries of flowing water. The traveler rose and crossed toward the balcony overlooking the Nile. Below, the city stirred gradually awake. Temple attendants swept broad stone pathways with reed brooms. Merchants arranged baskets of dates and figs beneath shaded awnings. From distant courtyards came the low murmur of morning prayers offered beneath towering columns painted with fading stars. Yet, despite the movement, Waset never seemed hurried. Even waking itself appeared ceremonial here. The traveler leaned lightly against the balcony railing and gazed toward the western horizon where the Valley of Kings rested beyond the river, hidden among pale cliffs touched by dawn. Somewhere beneath this ancient landscape waited the forgotten chamber Menetka had spoken of the night before. The corridors beneath the temple will open. Those words lingered gently in the traveler's thoughts. A soft knock sounded at the cedar door. When the traveler opened it, a young attendant stood waiting with a small bronze tray, carrying warm bread, honey, figs, and cool water infused with mint leaves. "The archivist requests your company when you are rested," she said with a respectful bow. The traveler thanked her quietly. After the simple meal, they followed the winding temple corridors toward the inner courts of the palace complex. Morning sunlight filtered through high stone openings overhead, casting long bands of gold across painted walls. Everywhere, the architecture seemed to hold memory within it. Columns carved generations earlier still carried traces of blue and crimson pigment. Ancient hieroglyphs climbed the walls like flowing rivers of symbols. Birds, stars, reeds, eyes, moons. The traveler passed through shaded courtyards where fountains murmured beside flowering gardens. White ibises wandered calmly through the pools, while servants moved silently among olive trees, carrying folded linens scented with myrrh. At last, the traveler entered the same courtyard where Menetka had been seated the previous evening. The archivist stood now beside the reflecting pool beneath the sycamore tree, arranging several scrolls into leather cases. Morning light touched the silver strands woven through his dark robes. "You slept well," he observed without turning. "Yes," the traveler replied. "That is good. Old places should be entered with a rested mind." Menetka secured the final scroll and motioned gently for the traveler to follow. temple archives lie beneath the eastern halls," he said as they began walking. "Most who visit Waset never see them. The priests prefer the upper courts where sunlight still reaches the walls, and the lower halls," the archivist smiled faintly. "They prefer silence." Together they crossed deeper into the palace temple complex. The crowds of attendants and visitors gradually faded behind them. Music from the outer courtyards softened into distant echoes. Even the warm morning air began to cool as they entered narrower corridors lined with heavy stone pillars. Oil lamps flickered along the walls. The scent of papyrus and aged cedar replaced the fragrance of gardens. Eventually, they reached an enormous bronze door engraved with constellations. Two silent guardians in ivory robes stood nearby, holding long staffs capped with obsidian lotus flowers. At Menetkaw's approach, both bowed respectfully and stepped aside. Without speaking, the archivist pressed his palm against the center of the bronze door. A deep, ancient sound echoed softly through the stone as the doors slowly opened inward. Cool air drifted outward from the darkness beyond. The traveler stepped inside. The archive halls stretched far beneath the temple, like an underground city. Rows upon rows of towering shelves disappeared into shadow, filled with carefully bound scrolls stored inside clay cylinders and carved wooden cases. Stone stairways descended toward lower chambers, illuminated only by scattered lanterns, glowing softly in alcoves along the walls. The silence here felt unlike ordinary silence. It was deep, layered, sacred. The traveler instinctively lowered their footsteps. Menetkaw moved through the archive halls with calm familiarity, occasionally brushing his fingers across scroll cases as though greeting old companions. "These records," he said quietly, "contain centuries of memory, flood records, astronomical observations, royal decrees, songs, dreams, funeral hymns, maps of stars that no longer appear where they once did." The traveler gazed upward toward the endless shelves. How can anyone remember where everything belongs? The archivist's smile returned. We do not remember everything. We simply care for it until it is needed. They continued deeper beneath the temple. The farther they descended, the older the architecture became. The upper archive halls were orderly and symmetrical, but the lower chambers seemed carved during earlier dynasties. Narrower passageways, rougher stone walls, ceilings painted with faded constellations nearly erased by time. The lantern light shifted softly across ancient carvings. Some depicted pharaohs seated beneath star-filled skies. Others showed long ceremonial boats drifting through the heavens. And always, again and again, the traveler noticed the lotus symbol, open petals beneath a crescent moon, the same symbol etched upon the amulet now, resting inside their robe pocket. At last, Menetkaw paused before a narrow doorway, hidden behind hanging linen curtains. "This chamber," he said softly, "contains records removed from the royal histories." The traveler felt a small stirring of anticipation. Menetka lifted one of the lanterns from the wall and stepped inside. The chamber beyond was circular and remarkably quiet, its ceiling domed overhead like the interior of a night sky. Blue pigment still lingered faintly above them, scattered with tiny golden stars. Stone shelves curved around the walls. Unlike the upper archives, these shelves held only a small number of scrolls. The traveler noticed immediately that many had been sealed carefully with wax and cord. "Why are these hidden?" they asked quietly. "Because memory can be dangerous to power," Menetka replied. "And sometimes peace is mistaken for weakness." He selected a single scroll case and carried it carefully toward a low stone table near the center of the chamber. For a moment, he simply rested his hands upon it, almost reverently. "This was written during the reign of Neb-Amen-Ra," he said. The traveler frowned slightly. The name was unfamiliar. "There is no pharaoh by that name in the royal records." "No," Menetka agreed softly. "There is not." Very carefully, he untied the ancient cord and unrolled the scroll beneath the lantern light. The papyrus was fragile with age, yet the ink remained astonishingly clear. Hieroglyphs flowed across the surface in elegant dark lines, accompanied by painted stars and lotus flowers. The traveler leaned closer. "What does it say?" Menetka studied the text quietly before speaking. "It tells of a ruler who became troubled during the later years of his reign, not by war or famine, but by the realization that nothing he built could follow him beyond death." The traveler listened closely while the archivist continued reading. According to the scroll, Neb-Amen-Ra had once ruled with extraordinary wealth and influence. Great temples had been raised in his name. Gold flowed through his courts. Musicians and scholars traveled from distant kingdoms to stand beneath his palace roofs. Yet over time, the pharaoh became withdrawn. He spent long nights walking alone beside the Nile. He ordered observatories built atop quiet temple towers so he could study the movement of the stars in silence. And eventually, he commanded the construction of a hidden sanctuary beneath Waset, a chamber known only to a small circle of trusted keepers. "A tomb?" the traveler asked. Menetka shook his head slowly. "No, something gentler." The lantern flame flickered softly between them. "A resting place for understanding," the archivist said. The traveler gazed down at the ancient scroll again. Why was his name erased? Menetka carefully rolled the papyrus closed once more. "Because rulers who turn away from conquest are often forgotten by those who come afterward." Silence settled through the chamber. Somewhere deep within the archive halls, water dripped rhythmically into unseen stone basins. The traveler felt strangely moved by the story. Not saddened, only thoughtful, as though the forgotten pharaoh had already begun speaking across the centuries. Menetka returned the scroll gently to its case. "There are more chambers below this one," he said after a while. The traveler looked up. "Lower than this, far lower." He lifted the lantern once more and motioned toward a narrow stairway partially concealed behind the curved shelves. The traveler had not noticed it before. Stone steps descended steeply into darkness beneath the archives. Cool air drifted upward, carrying the faint scent of minerals and ancient dust. The passages beneath the temple existed long before these archive halls, Menetka explained as they began descending. Some were carved during the earliest dynasties. Others, perhaps earlier still. The stairway curved slowly downward. Their footsteps echoed softly against worn stone. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the world became. Soon, even the distant sounds of the city had vanished entirely. Only the lantern light remained. The corridor eventually opened into a long underground passage lined with enormous carved pillars. Unlike the temple above, these columns were unpainted, their surfaces worn smooth by unimaginable time. Small channels of water flowed beside the pathway, reflecting trembling gold light across the ceiling. "It feels," the traveler whispered. "Outside time," Menetka offered gently. The traveler nodded. The archivist smiled faintly, but said nothing more. Together, they continued through the hidden corridors beneath Waset. They passed sealed bronze doors marked with forgotten symbols. Quiet meditation chambers containing empty stone benches. Pools of perfectly still black water reflecting lantern light like mirrors. In one chamber, the ceiling had been carved entirely into constellations. In another, thin shafts of sunlight descended impossibly from far above, illuminating drifting dust like falling stars. Hours seemed to dissolve there underground. The traveler no longer knew whether morning or afternoon waited beyond the stone ceilings overhead. Nothing remained except stillness. At last, they arrived before an immense wall of polished black granite. At its center rested a single narrow doorway sealed with pale limestone. No markings appeared upon it except one, a lotus flower beneath a crescent moon. The traveler's breath slowed. Menetka stood quietly beside the sealed entrance, his lantern casting soft light across the ancient stone. For several moments, neither spoke. Then the archivist finally said, almost in a whisper, "Beyond this door begins the path to the Pharaoh's secret." Part 3. The Chamber Beneath the Stars. The hidden doorway stood silently within the underground hall, pale beneath the glow of Menetka's lantern. For a long moment, neither the traveler nor the archivist moved. The air itself seemed different here, cooler, still, as though the stone chambers surrounding them had been holding their breath for centuries. The black granite wall reflected the lantern light in soft ripples, almost like dark water beneath moonlight. Tiny currents of air wandered through the corridor, carrying faint traces of sandalwood and old incense, long absorbed into the ancient stone. The traveler's gaze remained fixed upon the symbol carved into the sealed doorway. The lotus beneath the crescent moon, the same symbol worn smooth upon the golden amulet resting against their chest. Menetka stepped forward slowly. These lower halls, he said quietly, were known only to a small circle of keepers. Even among the priests of Waset, most believed the chambers beyond this door were empty. His fingers brushed lightly against the limestone seal. But some places are not meant to be crowded by history. The traveler listened to the silence around them. It no longer felt empty. The corridor seemed filled with something softer than sound. A quiet presence woven gently through the stone itself. Menetka pressed both palms against the doorway. A deep resonance answered from within the wall. Not loud, not sudden, only a low vibration, passing slowly through the granite floor beneath their feet, like distant thunder softened by time. Very gradually, the limestone door began to open inward. Dust drifted soundlessly through the lantern light. Cool darkness waited beyond. The archivist lifted the lantern higher. "Come," he said gently. The traveler followed him through the opening. The passage beyond was narrow at first, curving downward through smooth stone corridors, carved with flowing lines of hieroglyphs, unlike any seen elsewhere in the temple archives. These carvings seemed more delicate, almost poetic, stars pouring from open hands, rivers winding through constellations, sleeping figures beneath crescent moons. No scenes of war appeared here, no triumphant processions, no towering declarations of conquest, only images of stillness. The traveler noticed that even their footsteps sounded quieter within these halls, as though the stone absorbed every harsh edge from the world above. They descended slowly. The corridor curved gently deeper beneath Waset, illuminated only by scattered bronze oil lamps set into alcoves along the walls. To the traveler's surprise, several still burned faintly despite the passage of centuries. "How is that possible?" they whispered. Menetka's lantern glow reflected softly in his thoughtful eyes. "Some flames are tended carefully," he replied. The answer felt less like explanation and more like invitation. The traveler did not ask further. Ahead, the corridor gradually widened into a vast circular chamber. The traveler stopped instinctively. Above them stretched an enormous domed ceiling, painted the deep blue of midnight skies. Thousands of golden stars shimmered overhead, arranged in celestial patterns that curved across the chamber in breathtaking detail. The ceiling did not merely resemble the night sky. It felt like the night sky, like standing beneath the heavens themselves. Soft reflections moved across polished black floors, where shallow channels of water wound through the chamber in graceful spirals. The water flowed almost silently, catching fragments of starlight from above and scattering them gently across the walls. Tall stone columns ringed the room like silent guardians. Between them stood bronze braziers, releasing faint trails of perfumed smoke into the cool air. The traveler exhaled slowly. "It's beautiful," they whispered. Menet-Ka nodded. This chamber was known as the hall beneath the stars. The archivist crossed toward the center of the room, where a circular platform rose slightly above the surrounding floor. Upon it rested a single stone chair, unlike any throne the traveler had imagined. It was simple, smooth, unadorned except for the lotus and moon symbol carved into its back. "This was his sanctuary," Menet-Ka said softly. Neb-Amen-Ra came here during the final years of his life. The traveler gazed upward once more at the painted heavens overhead. He built all this to watch the stars, to remember his place beneath them. Silence returned, not heavy silence, peaceful silence, the kind found beside still water at night. The traveler wandered slowly through the chamber, while Menet-Ka remained near the central platform. Along the walls, more carvings revealed fragments of the forgotten Pharaoh's story. Neb-Amen-Ra walking beside the Nile, beneath crescent moons. Neb-Amen-Ra seated among scholars, studying celestial maps. Neb-Amen-Ra alone, beneath endless stars, while the river flowed beside him through darkness. Again and again, the carvings returned not to power, but to reflection, to listening, to stillness. The traveler paused beside one section of wall, where a line of hieroglyphs had been inlaid with tiny pieces of lapis lazuli. "What does this say?" they asked quietly. Menet-Ka approached with the lantern. He studied the inscription for several moments before translating softly. When the noise of kingship became too great, he descended beneath the earth to hear the river in silence. The traveler felt a strange warmth move gently through their chest. There was something deeply human within those words, not the voice of a distant ruler carved into legend, the voice of someone tired, someone searching, someone longing for peace. Menet-Ka's expression softened as though he sensed the traveler's thoughts. "The Pharaoh came to understand something rare," he said quietly. "That eternity cannot be built from monuments alone." The traveler looked again toward the simple stone chair beneath the painted stars. What happened to him? The archivist's gaze drifted upward toward the ceiling constellations. "In the final season of his life," he said, Neb-Amen-Ra withdrew from the palace above. He spent more and more time here beneath the temple, not hiding from death, but learning how to meet it peacefully. The lantern flames flickered gently beside them. He ordered his treasures distributed throughout the kingdom. Grain to villages, gold to temples, books to scholars, gardens planted beside the Nile for future generations. The traveler listened carefully, and when the court demanded he prepare a grand tomb, Menet-Ka continued. He refused. The traveler blinked softly. A pharaoh refused a tomb. Yes, The archivist smiled faintly. He said the stars required no walls to remember them. The words drifted through the chamber like quiet music. For a long while, neither spoke. The traveler moved toward the center platform at last, drawn gently toward the stone chair beneath the celestial dome. As they approached, they noticed something unusual. The floor surrounding the platform had been carved into an enormous circular map of the night sky. Thin lines of silver and gold traced the movement of constellations across seasons and years. At the very center rested a shallow basin filled with perfectly still water. The traveler knelt beside it. The reflection staring back from the basin was not only their own. Above them, the painted stars mirrored perfectly upon the water's surface, so that sky and reflection seemed to blend into one endless depth. And then, very softly, something changed. Not in the chamber itself, in the feeling of it. The air grew warmer. The lantern flames steadied. The traveler became aware of a presence nearby. Calm, patient, and impossibly gentle. No footsteps echoed. No shadows moved. Yet the sensation remained unmistakable. Someone was there. The traveler slowly lifted their gaze. Across the chamber, near the far columns, where the braziers glowed softly through drifting incense smoke, stood a figure clothed in pale linen robes. Still, silent, the traveler's breath slowed. The figure did not appear ghost-like or frightening. If anything, it seemed woven from moonlight and memory. Its face remained calm beneath the dim glow of the chamber, neither young nor old. Its expression carrying a deep and tranquil sadness, softened long ago into wisdom. Menetka lowered his eyes respectfully. "The king remembers," he said quietly. The traveler felt no fear, only stillness. The figure stepped forward slowly across the polished floor, where its feet touched the stone. Reflections shimmered faintly like water disturbed by gentle rain. At last, the figure stopped beside the circular basin. Its gaze rested upon the traveler with extraordinary kindness. Then, in a voice softer than wind moving through reeds, it spoke. "You have come seeking what was hidden." The traveler could barely find their voice. "Yes," the figure nodded slowly. "For many years," it said, "they believed I concealed treasure beneath these halls." Its eyes drifted upward toward the painted stars. But gold becomes heavy to those who cannot rest. The chamber remained utterly silent, except for the distant sound of flowing water beneath the floor. The traveler listened with complete stillness. "I once believed monuments would preserve me," the Pharaoh continued gently. "I believed stone could protect memory from time." The faintest smile touched his face, but the Nile taught otherwise. The traveler glanced toward the shallow basin, reflecting the constellations above. "The river forgets nothing," the Pharaoh whispered, "yet it clings to nothing." Those words seemed to settle deep within the chamber itself. The traveler felt them not only in thought, but in breath, in heartbeat, In silence, the forgotten king slowly extended one hand toward the painted heavens overhead. All things move onward, he said. Empires, names, sorrows, even joy. The incense drifted softly between the columns. But peace comes when we stop asking time to stand still. The traveler lowered their eyes. Some hidden part of those words felt familiar, as though they had always known them somewhere beneath the noise of ordinary life. The Pharaoh's presence remained calm and warm beside the basin. I did not hide this chamber to protect treasure, he said softly. I hid it so silence could survive. The lantern flames flickered once, then steadied again. The traveler became aware that the chamber itself seemed alive with listening, not haunted, held like a sanctuary, waiting patiently through centuries for someone willing to hear what could only be spoken quietly. The forgotten king looked once more toward the traveler. When the world grows heavy, he said, remember the river. The words drifted gently through the chamber, like the final notes of distant music. Then, little by little, the figure began to fade into the lantern-lit stillness, not vanishing suddenly, only dissolving softly into shadow and reflected starlight, until nothing remained except the quiet chamber beneath the painted heavens. The traveler remained kneeling beside the basin, neither frightened nor astonished. Peace lingered there. Menetka stood nearby in respectful silence. After a long while, the archivist finally spoke. Few are invited to hear the king's final teaching. The traveler looked up slowly. Was it real? Menetka's expression softened. In ancient places, he said gently, there are questions less important than understanding. Above them, the painted constellations shimmered silently across the great dome ceiling, while beneath the chamber floor, unseen waters continued flowing endlessly through the deep stone heart of Waset. Part 4. The Weight of Gold and Silence. For a long while after the presence of the forgotten Pharaoh faded into the lantern-lit stillness, neither the traveler nor Menetka spoke. The hall beneath the stars remained quiet around them. Perfumed smoke drifted slowly upward from the bronze braziers, dissolving into the painted constellations overhead. Water continued its gentle passage through the narrow stone channels, crossing the chamber floor, carrying shimmering reflections across the black polished stone like fragments of moonlight floating upon the Nile. The traveler still knelt beside the circular basin. Its surface had become perfectly still once more. Only the stars remained there now. Stars above, stars below. The chamber seemed suspended between two skies. At last, the traveler rose slowly to their feet. The silence no longer felt mysterious in the way it had before. It had softened into something calmer, familiar almost, as though the hidden sanctuary had quietly accepted their presence. Menetka stood beside one of the great columns, his lantern resting low in his hands. The first time I entered this chamber, he said gently, I remained here until sunrise without moving. The traveler looked toward him. You saw him too. The archivist smiled faintly. I saw what I needed to see. His answer carried no secrecy or avoidance, only calm understanding. In this place, the traveler sensed, truths were allowed to remain gentle around the edges. Nothing demanded sharp certainty. The traveler crossed slowly through the chamber once more, pausing beside the carved walls, illuminated by soft amber light. Now, the images seemed different than before, not because they had changed, because understanding had changed. Earlier, the carvings had appeared ancient and distant, fragments of forgotten history sealed beneath stone. But now, the traveler noticed the quiet humanity within them. Neb-Amen-Ra seated beside the river, with sandals discarded in the reeds. Neb-Amen-Ra listening to musicians beneath open courtyards. Neb-Amen-Ra studying the night sky, not as a king commanding the heavens, but as a solitary soul searching for peace beneath them. The traveler paused beside another inscription, partially hidden behind one of the pillars. What does this one say? They asked softly. Menet-Ka approached and lifted the lantern. The hieroglyphs shimmered gold against dark blue stone. The archivist translated slowly. He who carries every treasure will eventually long for empty hands. The traveler lowered their gaze thoughtfully. Somewhere far above them, beyond layers of stone and temple walls, morning had likely passed into afternoon. Yet deep beneath Waset, time seemed to move differently, or perhaps not at all. The chamber existed in its own stillness. The traveler walked toward the central platform once more, resting fingertips lightly against the smooth edge of the stone chair, where the forgotten Pharaoh had once sat beneath painted stars. No jewels adorned it, no ivory, no gold, only simplicity. And somehow, after all the grandeur above, the towering temples, the immense statues beside the Nile, the palace courts and ceremonial halls, this quiet seat beneath the earth felt more powerful than any throne. Not because it ruled, because it released. The traveler closed their eyes briefly. They thought of distant cities crossed during the long journey southward. Crowded markets, endless roads, voices layered upon voices, lives moving quickly beneath the weight of worry and ambition. And then they thought of the Pharaoh walking alone beside the Nile at night, listening to water moving through darkness. The contrast felt immense, yet strangely comforting. Why did he erase himself? The traveler asked at last. Menet-Ka remained silent for several moments before answering. He did not erase himself entirely, the archivist said softly. He simply chose not to force the future to remember him. The traveler opened their eyes again. That seems lonely. Perhaps, Menet-Ka replied, or perhaps peaceful. The lantern light flickered gently between them. There are rulers who build monuments so the world cannot forget their names, the archivist continued. But Neb-Amen-Ra came to believe memory should flow naturally, like the Nile itself. The traveler listened carefully. He once wrote, Menetka said, "What is loved quietly endures longer than what is carved in fear." The words settled deeply into the still chamber. The traveler turned slowly toward the painted heavens overhead. For the first time in many years, they realized how tired they had become without fully noticing it. Not physically, something deeper, a quiet exhaustion carried too long beneath ordinary days. The constant effort of holding tightly to memories, expectations, unfinished thoughts, old regrets. The traveler had never named that feeling before. Yet here beneath the temple, surrounded by ancient silence and flowing water, it seemed to loosen gently within them, as though the chamber itself invited weary things to rest. Menetka crossed toward one of the side alcoves and returned carrying a small bronze vessel filled with cool water. "Drink," he said kindly. The traveler accepted it. The water tasted faintly of mint and stone, fresh and calming. Beyond the columns, the hidden waterways continued their slow passage through darkness. The traveler listened to them carefully now. They realized the sound had been present the entire time, beneath every conversation. Steady, unhurried, endless, like breathing. The river flows beneath these chambers, the traveler asked. Menetka nodded. Small channels connected to the Nile. The architects designed them intentionally. Why? The archivist smiled softly. So the king would never forget what waits beyond walls. Silence returned again. Comfortable silence. The traveler wandered farther along the curved perimeter of the chamber until they discovered another narrow passage, partially concealed behind hanging linen drapes darkened with age. Menetka followed calmly as the traveler stepped inside. This smaller corridor led into a quiet room, unlike the grand celestial hall. Low shelves lined the walls. Clay jars rested in neat rows. Bundles of papyrus scrolls had been carefully sealed inside cedar chests. And at the center of the chamber stood a long stone table covered not with treasure, but objects of startling simplicity. A polished river stone, a dried lotus blossom, a small wooden flute, a child's painted toy boat faded with time. The traveler stared quietly. "These belong to him?" they asked. Menetka nodded. The pharaoh kept few possessions here during his final years. The traveler moved slowly around the table. There were no crowns, no ceremonial weapons, no jeweled relics, only ordinary things touched by memory. The archivist rested one hand lightly against the edge of the stone table. He discovered that objects become most precious when they remind us how briefly beautiful life is. The traveler picked up the small wooden flute carefully. Its surface had been worn smooth by countless hands. Did he play? Poorly, Menetka said, with the faintest hint of amusement. The travelers smiled. The sound surprised them. It felt as though laughter itself belonged differently here, softer, gentler, free from sharpness. They returned the flute carefully to the table. At the far end of the room rested one final object beneath folded linen cloth. The traveler hesitated before lifting it. Beneath the fabric lay a simple mirror, polished from silver. Its surface reflected softly in the lantern light, yet age had slightly clouded the metal, blurring every image upon it. The traveler looked into the mirror. Their reflection appeared softened around the edges, almost dreamlike. And suddenly, the traveler understood. The forgotten Pharaoh had not hidden himself beneath the earth because he feared death. He had come here to sit quietly beside what could not be controlled. Time, change, the flowing river of existence itself. The mirror trembled slightly in the traveler's hands before they carefully returned it to the table. Menetka watched silently. He once said, the archivist murmured, "The heart grows lighter when it stops trying to preserve every passing thing." The traveler lowered their gaze. Outside the chamber, distant water echoed through unseen channels beneath the stone. The sound felt almost impossibly soothing now, like the pulse of the ancient world itself. After a while, Menetka guided the traveler back toward the hall beneath the stars. The great chamber seemed even quieter than before. The braziers had burned lower. Soft amber light shimmered across the painted constellations overhead, while reflections drifted lazily through the water spirals beneath their feet. The traveler crossed once more to the circular basin at the center of the room. They knelt again beside the still water. This time, when they gazed into its reflective surface, they did not search for visions or hidden presences, only stillness. And within that stillness, something inside them had begun to settle. The worries carried across deserts and rivers, the unnamed longing that had followed them from city to city, even the restless need to uncover mysteries. All of it seemed quieter now, not erased, simply softened. The traveler understood then that the Pharaoh's secret had never truly been hidden beneath stone corridors or sealed chambers. It had always been hidden beneath noise, beneath distraction, beneath the endless human fear of letting moments pass away. Neb-Amen-Ra had not built this sanctuary to escape the world. He had built it to listen to it properly, to sit beneath painted stars and remember that life flowed onward, whether held tightly or released gently. The traveler closed their eyes. The chamber air remained cool against their skin. Somewhere far above, unseen winds were likely crossing the Nile at sunset now, turning the river gold beneath the fading day. Time continued moving, and for the first time in a very long while, the traveler no longer wished to stop it. Menetka's voice rose softly through the silence. "Come," he said gently. "There is one final passage before night returns." The traveler opened their eyes slowly. Together, they crossed the celestial chamber beneath the endless painted stars. while the hidden waters of Waset continued flowing quietly through the deep stone heart of ancient Egypt. Part 5. The river carries all things. The hidden chambers beneath Waset grew quieter as evening approached above the world of stone. Though the traveler could not yet see the sky, they sensed the slow turning of the day through subtle changes in the air itself. The coolness deepened gently through the corridors. The lantern flames along the walls glowed warmer against the growing darkness. Somewhere distant within the underground waterways, the sound of flowing water seemed softer now, slower, as though even the hidden currents beneath the temple were preparing themselves for night. Manutka walked ahead, carrying the bronze lantern low beside him. Its amber light moved across the ancient walls in quiet ripples. Together, they passed once more through the hall beneath the stars, beneath the painted constellations that shimmered softly overhead. The traveler glanced upward as they crossed the chamber for the final time. The celestial ceiling no longer felt like decoration. It felt alive with memory. Every golden star above seemed placed there not merely to imitate the heavens, but to remind all who entered that human life unfolded beneath something vast and patient. The traveler slowed near the central basin one last time. Its still water reflected the constellations perfectly. Sky above, sky below, and between them silence. Manutka paused nearby without speaking. The traveler looked into the reflection for several long breaths, allowing the calmness of the chamber to settle fully into the quiet spaces within their thoughts. Then at last, softly, they said, "I think I understand now." The archivist's expression warmed gently in the lantern light. The king would have been pleased. The traveler turned toward him. Did many people ever come here? Very few. And now, Manutka's gaze drifted slowly upward toward the painted heavens. "Now the chamber waits," he said quietly, "as it always has." The traveler rested a hand lightly against the golden lotus amulet beneath their robe. The small object felt different now, not like a key, not like a relic, more like a reminder, a quiet thread connecting river, stars, memory, and rest. Together, they continued onward through the hidden corridors. The journey back seemed gentler than the descent had been. The traveler noticed details previously overlooked. The soft curves carved into the stone ceilings, the faint scent of lotus oil lingering near ancient alcoves, the way lantern reflections trembled lightly within the narrow water channels running beside the passageways. Everything appeared touched by care, not grand ambition. Care. The corridors themselves felt less like secret tunnels and more like an act of devotion built slowly across generations by those who understood the value of stillness. As they climbed the winding stairways toward the upper archive halls, the distant sounds of the living world gradually returned. At first, only faintly, a bell somewhere above, footsteps echoing through far corridors. the rustle of linen, robes moving through temple courts. The traveler realized how deeply quiet the hidden sanctuary had truly been. Yet instead of making the upper world feel loud or unpleasant, the sounds now carried a strange gentleness of their own. Life continuing, breathing, flowing onward. At last, they emerged once more into the circular archive chamber, where the sealed scrolls rested beneath painted ceilings of faded stars. The air here felt warmer, older somehow. Manutka returned the lantern carefully to its bronze stand beside the doorway. For a moment, neither moved. Then the archivist crossed toward one of the stone shelves and removed a small papyrus scroll tied with blue cord. He offered it to the traveler. "What is it?" the traveler asked softly. "A copy of the final inscription found within the king's sanctuary." The traveler accepted it carefully. "The original remains below," Manutka said. "But wisdom survives best when carried gently from one life into another." The traveler looked down at the scroll resting in their hands. The papyrus smelled faintly of cedar and age. "Thank you," they said quietly. The archivist inclined his head. "The Nile brought you here for a reason." Together, they crossed the archive halls toward the upper temple once more. As they passed between the towering shelves, the traveler noticed how the silence had changed within them. Earlier, silence had seemed mysterious. Now it felt welcoming, no longer empty space waiting to be filled, but a place where thoughts could finally rest. When the great bronze doors of the archive halls opened, evening light spilled softly into the corridor beyond. The traveler paused instinctively. After so many hours beneath the earth, the sight of open sky felt almost dreamlike. Dusk had settled across Waset. The temple courtyards glowed beneath hundreds of lanterns, now being lit one by one beside the reflecting pools and garden pathways. Warm orange light shimmered against limestone walls, while long shadows stretched peacefully beneath the towering columns. Above the city, the first stars of night had already begun appearing. The traveler followed Manutka slowly through the open-air corridors. Cool wind drifted in from the Nile, carrying scents of river reeds, jasmine blossoms, and distant cooking fires along the harbor. Musicians played softly somewhere within the palace gardens. The sound of harps floated through the evening air like water moving over smooth stone. Everything felt impossibly calm. The traveler realized then that the world above had not changed at all during their time below. Only the way they moved through it had changed. At the sycamore courtyard, where they had first met, Manutka stopped beside the reflecting pool beneath the flowering branches. White blossoms drifted lazily across the water's surface. Night insects hummed softly among the gardens. For several moments, the archivist simply watched the lantern reflections moving through the pool. Then he spoke quietly. "Tomorrow before dawn, a northbound riverboat leaves the eastern harbor." The traveler looked toward him. "You wish me to leave?" A A gentle smile touched Manutka's face. No, but journeys are meant to continue. The traveler understood. The hidden sanctuary beneath Waset had never been a place to remain forever. Its purpose was not escape. It was remembrance. The archivist reached into his sleeve and withdrew a small folded cloth bundle. Inside rested several dried blue lotus petals tied together with gold thread. A gift from the temple gardens, he said. Place them beside your bed when you next sleep near the river. The traveler accepted the offering carefully. Will I see you again? They asked softly. Manutka's eyes reflected the lantern light like still water. Whenever you remember stillness, he said gently, you will not be far from this place. The wind moved softly through the sycamore branches overhead. Neither spoke again for a while. There was no need. Eventually, the traveler returned to the quiet chamber overlooking the Nile. Night had fully settled over Waset now. From the balcony, the city appeared transformed into a sea of lanterns shimmering beside the dark riverbanks. Temple towers rose against the starlit sky, while boats drifted silently through silver reflections upon the Nile below. The traveler stood there for a long time beneath the stars, listening, breathing, remembering the hidden chamber beneath the earth, remembering the forgotten Pharaoh's voice. The river forgets nothing, yet it clings to nothing. At last the traveler slept, and for the first time in many years, sleep arrived gently. No restless dreams followed, only stillness, only soft currents of darkness flowing peacefully beneath distant stars. Before dawn, the traveler departed Waset. The eastern harbor remained quiet beneath the fading night sky, as attendants loaded baskets of figs, woven cloth, and sealed jars onto the waiting riverboat. Lanterns swayed gently along the docks, while mist drifted low across the surface of the Nile. The traveler stepped aboard silently, wrapped in a light linen cloak against the cool morning air. They settled near the bow of the vessel as the ropes were released from the stone harbor posts. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boat drifted outward into the current. Waset began to recede behind them. The great temple columns softened into silhouettes beneath the paling sky. Palace walls faded into silver mist. High above the riverbanks, torchlights flickered faintly beside distant courtyards before vanishing one by one into dawn. The traveler watched quietly as the city disappeared, yet nothing about the departure felt sorrowful, only peaceful. The Nile carried the boat northward with effortless calm. Water brushed softly against the hull. Reeds whispered along the shoreline. Birds rose slowly into the brightening sky. The traveler unfolded Menetka's papyrus scroll carefully beside the fading lantern light. Upon it, written in elegant dark ink, appeared the final inscription of Neb-Amen-Ra. The traveler read the words silently. When the river calls you to rest, do not fear the current. No star remains forever in one place. No season holds the earth unchanged. Yet all things continue. The water remembers, the sky remembers, and peace belongs not to those who resist the passing of time, but to those who move gently with it. The traveler closed the scroll slowly. Above the eastern horizon, dawn finally broke across ancient Egypt. Golden light spilled across the Nile in long, shimmering paths. The riverboat drifted onward through the glowing water, while morning birds circled lazily above the reeds. Palm groves passed quietly along the shoreline. Distant villages awakened beneath trails of pale cooking smoke rising into the brightening sky. The traveler leaned back against folded blankets near the bow of the vessel. Warm sunlight touched their face. The movement of the boat became slow and rhythmic beneath them, like breathing. Behind their closed eyes, the painted stars of the hidden chamber still glimmered softly. The hall beneath the stars, the forgotten king, the endless river flowing beneath stone and memory alike. Gradually, thoughts loosened like drifting leaves upon water. The traveler no longer felt the need to hold tightly to them. Above, clouds moved peacefully across the widening sky. Below, the Nile carried all things onward through the ancient world, and wrapped within the gentle motion of river, wind, and morning light. The traveler rested quietly at last as the endless waters of the Nile flowed softly beneath the waking sun. The Nile continues flowing through light and shadow, carrying all things gently onward. And as its waters drift through ancient lands and forgotten time, so too may your thoughts drift into stillness. If this journey brought you peace tonight, you're welcome to return for more calming sleep stories, ancient mysteries, and quiet adventures to fall asleep to. And wherever the river of your dreams may lead you next, may it flow gently. Good night, dear dreamer.